King Uzziah was one of the great kings of Judah. He reigned 52 years, and he was faithful to God, and God blessed him and helped him. But pride got to his heart towards the end. He presumed that he could go into the temple and offer a sacrifice to the Lord. And so the Lord struck him with leprosy, so that his son Jotham took over the administration and subsequently became king on the death of Uzziah. And he reigned a total of 16 years. He also walked in the ways of his father, in the ways of the Lord. But he died, and in the 17th year of Pekah the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, Ahaz the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Indeed, he made his son pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to make war. And they besieged Ahaz, but could not overthrow him. At that time Rezin, king of Syria, captured Elath for Syria, and drove the men of Judah from Elath. Then the Edomites went to Elath, and dwell there to this day. So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and save me from the hand of the king of Syria, and from the hand of the king of Israel, who rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasuries of the king's house, and sent it as a present to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria heeded him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it, carried its people captive to Kir, and killed Rezin. Now King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw an altar that was at Damascus. And King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest the design of the altar and its pattern, according to all its workmanship. Then Urijah the priest built an altar according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Urijah the priest made it before King Ahaz came back from Damascus. And when the king came back from Damascus, the king saw the altar. And the king approached the altar and made offerings on it. So he burned his burnt offering and his grain offering. And he poured his drink offering and sprinkled the blood of his peace offerings on that altar. He also brought the bronze altar which was before the Lord from the front of the temple, from between the new altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the new altar. Then King Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, On the great new altar burn the morning burnt offering, the evening grain offering, the king's burnt sacrifice, and his grain offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, their grain offering, and their drink offerings, and sprinkle on it the blood of the burnt offering, and all the blood of the sacrifice. And the bronze altar shall be for me to inquire by. Thus did Urijah the priest, according to all that King Ahaz commanded. And King Ahaz cut off the panels of the carts, and removed the lavers from them, and he took down the sea from the bronze oxen that were under it, and he put it on a pavement of stones. And he removed the Sabbath pavilion, which they had built in the temple, and he removed the king's outer entrance from the house of the Lord, on account of the king of Assyria. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaz, which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Ahaz rested with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. Then Hezekiah his son reigned in his place. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from 2 Kings chapter 16. The Lord has given us details of how King Ahaz sinned, that we might be warned not to fall into the same traps. He began to reign as a young man, 20 years old, and he reigned 16 years before he died. So he died at a relatively young age. And we're told he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord. And specifically, he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He was still a religious man, but it's not religion that saves, it's God who saves. The great sin in Israel was the setting up of alternative altars, one at Dan and one at Bethel, and an alternative system of worshipping the Lord. The Lord had said people were to come to Jerusalem. That's where he was, and that's where they were to worship. But Jeroboam I had feared that his nation would turn back to the king of Judah, and he would lose his role as king. So he prevented his people from going up to Jerusalem, giving them a fake alternative. So there was strife, religious strife, leading to political strife between the northern kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah for all the time of the kings after Solomon. Now, the fact that they had a false altar meant that the kingdom of Israel was very prone to going in other directions with other things as well. If you are on the right path, then you're on the path. But if you get off the path, then there are hundreds of ways that you can go. And that's exactly what the kingdom of Israel was doing. Having begun to worship the calves from Egypt, they also then worshipped Baal. And this was the direction that Ahaz was taking Judah. The presence of the altar and the priests had been very much a stabilising influence. Ahaz, first of all, encourages sacrifices away from the temple, under every green tree, on every high hill. And then he sacrifices his own son on one of these places, completely contrary to the will of God. Indeed, why God drove out the Canaanites from the land in the first place. The Lord seeks to discipline him, allowing Syria and Israel to come up against him. And while they don't defeat him, they unsettle him. But rather than turning to the Lord for help, he turns to the king of Assyria. Assyria had risen up against Israel, had taken many of the people away captive, and had put the rest in tribute. So there was a treaty. Ahaz now petitions him to break that treaty, to also attack and make an alliance with Judah. And he pays him to do that. 50 years earlier, Jonah had gone to Nineveh and preached against the city that God would destroy them. They had repented. Now they have risen to a great power and are seeking to take over the world. So Assyria attacks Syria and Israel, and Ahaz goes to visit Tiglath-Pileser in Damascus. There he sees a really fancy altar, and he commissions that it be built in Jerusalem. He moves the Lord's altar aside and puts his new altar in its place, and tells the priest Urijah to use the new altar for all of the regular sacrifices, and just reserve the Lord's altar for when Ahaz needs to consult the Lord personally, although there's no record that he ever did. But now Ahaz has to pay the king of Assyria, who pressures him to start dismantling the temple, one of the great wonders of that world, taking away the oxen that were under the sea and other pieces of the furniture. The New Testament tells believers, when you have a squabble with other believers, not to go to law before unbelievers. This is exactly what Ahaz was doing, getting the king of Assyria to fight Israel